Welcome to the debate. When you watch someone strap into a high-tech robotic exoskeleton, it looks like magic.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got this perfect geometry built into it, titanium joints, hydraulic strength, flawless balance. You simply step inside and suddenly you possess the structural capacity to lift a car.
Right, but it provides this incredible illusion of mastery because the machinery is doing all the heavy lifting. The person inside feels instantly capable, regardless of their actual, physical conditioning.
Exactly. But then I ask you to sprint across a rocky, uneven field in that suit, and suddenly that pristine engineering becomes a massive liability.
Yeah, you stumble. Or you freeze up.
Right, the suit cannot adapt to the chaotic friction of reality because the suit doesn't actually know how to move. It only knows how to hold its shape.
Which is the ultimate execution gap. You possess the structure, but you completely lack the internal capability to actually inhabit it when the environment pushes back.
And that exact tension is what we are unpacking today in the third part of our series on authentic controllability. So we previously established that reliability is fundamentally about controlling variation, right? And we explored how practice is the tool that makes a structure reliable.
Yeah, and today we are asking the critical next question. What is the primary catalyst that turns a reliable external structure into something a human truly owns?
Right. And I will argue that rigorous observational practice is the only mechanism that builds the internal logic and independent capability necessary for true ownership.
And, well, I will argue that without the human engine of meaning, practice is mere compliance. Meaning is the actual catalyst that creates authentic ownership.
Let's look at the modern landscape of AI collaboration, because this is where the exoskeleton metaphor becomes a daily reality. AI provides us with a pristine external scaffolding. It completely bypasses the terror of the blank page.
Sure.
You type in a prompt, and it hands you a perfectly optimized code base, or a brilliant strategic plan, or a complex legal framework. But it is just geometry without mass. A person can possess a beautiful, polished AI-generated plan without owning a shred of the logic required to execute it in the real world.
Because they didn't build the logic.
Right. Practice is what closes this execution gap. And crucially, practice is not mindless repetition. It is the active observation of hidden variation. It exposes systematic flaws in your own execution. Through systematic defect reduction, practice makes the structure reliable. Human-owned capability ultimately requires the ability to repeat, revise, adapt, and explain the structure completely independently. That independent logic is forged entirely in the fires of rigorous practice.
Well, I come at it from a completely different direction. I don't deny that observation and variation control are technically necessary to stabilize a system. A bridge has to hold weight, right?
Of course.
But your framework lacks a human engine. If reliability is your only mechanism, the result is just mechanical optimization. It becomes sterile efficiency. You become a robot executing a script.
I wouldn't say a robot.
But you do. Meaning is the fundamental reason a person stays with practice when the process becomes difficult. Capability only becomes mine when it connects to care, choice, identity, and, personal resonance.
Okay, but
Meaning protects practice from degrading into mechanical repetition. Authentic ownership requires a voluntary attachment, not just execution. AI can build the structure all day long, but AI cannot generate the care required to actually own it.
I see why you emphasize care, but let's look at what actually happens when we hit the friction of real-world execution. We both agree AI gives us the starting artifact. The real challenge is the moment the practitioner takes that blueprint and tries to use it.
Right.
They are immediately hit by what I call systemic variance injectors.
Okay, let's ground that term. What does a systemic variance injector actually look like to a normal person sitting at their desk, trying to use an AI-generated document?
Think of a variance injector as a tiny, invisible leak in a pipe. Let's say you're using AI to build a complex software architecture. The AI gives you the structure. You start implementing it, but 2 hours in, cognitive fatigue sets in. Your attention drifts.
Happens to everyone.
Exactly. And because you're tired, you name a variable inconsistently, or you misunderstand a core term the AI used. That is a variance injector. Over 10,000 lines of code, that tiny leak bursts the pipe. The system crashes.
And you believe that practice is the only way to find those leaks?
Practice is the act of hunting of those leaks. If you just try to brute force your way through, typing the code over and over without analyzing why it's breaking, you are acting as a variance injector yourself.
Interesting.
Yeah, mindless repetition bakes those defects deeper into the system. You are neurologically training yourself to execute the structure poorly. Practice must be the active observation of that variation. You have to notice the wobble.
The wobble, yeah.
You have to see where your attention drifts or where your timing becomes unstable before you can manage it. Reliability is systematic defect reduction.
That sounds incredibly exhausting. I mean, you're describing a process of intense, sustained cognitive effort, active observation, hunting down every tiny leak in the pipe while battling your own fatigue. That drains a person.
It is hard work, yes.
When you are in the thick of fixing mistakes, recovering from hesitation, decoding AI hallucinations, you are in a stabilization funnel. In that moment, if you only rely on the mechanics of practice, you feel like a slave to the structure. The AI's blueprint is dictating your every move, and you are just desperately trying to comply.
But if AI generates the architectural blueprint, practice is the structural stress test of the materials. You have to apply weight, wind, and friction to see where the beams bend.
Sure, but even if a practitioner deeply cares about a project, even if they have all the meaning in the world, how can meaning matter if the building simply collapses under the cognitive friction of attention drift? The structure must be made reliable first. Well, I fundamentally reject that sequence. What do you think sustains the practitioner during that stress test? AI is totally indifferent to whether the project succeeds or crashes. It doesn't care if the pipe bursts.
That's true.
Only the human source provides the heartbeat. Meaning provides the vital grit to survive that stabilization funnel. It is the voluntary attachment to the work that stops a person from simply abandoning the AI's blueprint when it requires heavy repair.
But they still have to do the repair.
Yes, but if there is no meaning, the moment the execution gets difficult, the human will just ask the AI to generate a new blueprint or walk away entirely. Meaning is the engine that keeps you in the room to fix the leaks.
I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning, because you are treating meaning as if it is some magical fuel injected from the outside, entirely independent of the structural work.
Not independent, no.
I argue that meaning actually emerges through the mastery of the structure. When you stay in the room and successfully manage that friction, you reach a breaking point where the nature of the work fundamentally changes. You experience a kinetic pivot.
Okay, another heavy term. Break down the mechanics of a kinetic pivot.
Let's look at elite athletics. Take the figure skater Ilya Melanin's quadruple axel. To achieve the 0.8 seconds of airtime required for 4.5 revolutions, he can't just try hard or care a lot.
Sure, care doesn't keep you in the air.
Right. He has to master a precise biomechanical structure. He minimizes his moment of inertia to maximize rotation speed. He takes horizontal speed and perfectly redirects it into vertical lift. That redirection of energy, from scattered effort into flawless execution, that is the kinetic pivot.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for a physical body on ice. But wait, let me stop you there. How does that kinetic pivot actually happen when a programmer is staring at thousands of lines of AI-generated Python, or, when a writer is working with an AI-generated outline? What is the cognitive equivalent of a skater's quick snap?
That is a crucial distinction. In knowledge work, this pivot happens when you stop looking at the structure and start moving through it. When you first get the AI outline, you are stumbling. You are constantly stopping to figure out what a term means or why a specific function is there.
Right, there's a lot of hesitation.
Your cognitive energy is scattered into repair and hesitation. But as your rigorous practice reduces that meaningless noise, the hesitation, the unclear terminology, the structural skewness, your attention is finally freed. Pushing the standard deviation of that noise towards zero creates a constrained bloom.
A constrained bloom.
Yes. The structure is now so reliable, the axis of your work is so stable, that you are finally free to innovate within it. You don't have to think about the syntax anymore, so you can finally think about the architecture. The control of variation is what creates the space for cognitive freedom.
I see the logic. But I don't buy that pushing standard deviation to 0 inherently produces a bloom. If you push standard deviation to 0 without meaning, you don't get freedom, you get a robot. We call it mechanical domination.
How is flawless execution considered domination?
Because the danger of AI isn't that it will do the work poorly. The danger is that it will do the work so perfectly that you become nothing more than a biological spell checker for a machine's ideas.
Well,
I mean, you can flawlessly execute a piece of music, hitting every note with mathematical precision, and it will sound completely dead. A pianist doesn't practice to sound like a machine, and a knowledge worker doesn't structure information to eliminate thought.
but they must structure it to eliminate error.
To eliminate meaningless error, yes. But here is the critical distinction. We must define what we are actually aiming for. We are aiming for authentic controllability. We reduce the accidental instability, the technical crashes, the distraction, specifically to protect meaningful freedom.
Okay, go on.
Meaningful freedom is the signal. It's the artistry, the conceptual choice, the unique human phrasing, the synthesized insight. If you just focus on the kinetic pivot and defect reduction, you risk erasing the human entirely.
I don't think it erases the human.
It does if it's purely mechanical. We aren't just clearing cognitive space. We are clearing space so that the self can express something intentional. The goal is to ensure the system remains a deeply human performance, not a mechanical anomaly.
That's an interesting reframing, though. I would point out that you cannot express something intentional if your vehicle keeps breaking down. To resolve this tension between mechanical reliability and meaningful expression, we have to trace the actual chronological path from a blank page to true capability. You can't just jump straight to meaning. There's an inescapable sequence here.
I agree there is a sequence, but I suspect we disagree on what actually pushes a person across the finish line, into ownership.
Let's find out. So the journey starts with the AI collaborated structure. This is where we bypass the blank page. The AI organizes scattered ideas, generates the first draft, and provides the starting architecture. It accelerates formation. But as we established with the exoskeleton, this is just external scaffolding. You don't own it yet.
Right, it's the illusion of mastery. You possess the artifact, but not the capability.
Which requires the next phase, repeated engagement. You don't just read the AI output, you clash with it. You take the code or the speech or the strategic plan and you try to use it in the real world.
And that is where the friction begins. That is where you realize the exoskeleton doesn't know how to walk on rocks.
Yes, because you are actively engaged. The variation becomes visible. You stop blindly accepting the AI's output and you start detecting the instability, the noise, and the weak points. You see where the AI's logic fails in your specific context, and you see where your own attention drifts.
Which leads right into the stabilization phase. The meaningless variation is reduced.
Exactly. The terminology becomes consistent, your cognitive flow stabilizes, the timing locks in, the structural logic is now sound, and the practitioner can execute it reliably. For me, this structural progression from scaffolding to clashing to seeing the friction to stabilizing the noise is what builds the practitioner's independent logic. The capability is forged right there.
It is forged there, but it is not yet owned there. This is the ultimate execution gap. You have stabilized the attention, you have reduced the noise. But like I said earlier, a biological spell checker can reduce noise.
So what's missing?
Ownership only begins when you can return to that generated practice structure, reshape it under the immense pressure of real-world demands, and still recognize it as your own. That's the fifth step. Human-owned capability emerges.
And you believe meaning is the only thing that triggers that final transformation.
It has to be. The person can now repeat, adapt, express, and explain the structure without relying on the AI at all. But why do they adapt it? Why do they express it in a specific way? Because of meaning. Meaning is the filter through which they make conceptual choices.
I see.
Meaning is what allows practice to shape the self, rather than merely optimizing performance. Meaning is what transforms that reliable mechanical structure into human-owned capability.
I see why you emphasize that final transition. You are saying that the structure gives you the ability to act,
but meaning gives you the reason and the direction to act.
Exactly. Let's go back to your figure skating example with Ilya Malinin. The biomechanical structure, the physics of the jump, the minimal moment of inertia, that's the exoskeleton. The thousands of hours of falling on the ice, the systematic defect reduction, that is the practice that makes it reliable.
Right.
But the desire to push the boundaries of human flight, the artistic expression of the program, the choice to attempt that jump in a high-stakes Olympic environment rather than a safe practice rink, that is meaning. That is what makes the jump his.
That is a fair synthesis. If we look at the complete formula we've been building toward today, it really requires all three components working in sequence. AI helps build the structure. It organizes the entropy.
Right.
Practice makes it reliable. It tests the geometry against the mass of real-world friction. And meaning makes it yours. It transforms external compliance into authentic ownership.
Meaning makes it mine. That really is the central thesis. We share the understanding that a structure can be generated almost instantly by an AI, but capability cannot be generated instantly. Capability grows slowly. It requires the friction of practice and the voluntary attachment of meaning.
There is still an ongoing tension, though. We are always going to be balancing the rigorous, unyielding demands of variation control with the deeply personal necessity of authentic purpose. If you lean too far into structure, you get that mechanical domination you warned about.
Yeah.
But if you lean too far into meaning without structure, you get a beautiful idea that collapses because it has no reliable execution.
It's the balance between the technical noise we must reduce and the human signal we must protect. Recognizing this boundary is vital as we move forward in an AI-saturated world. We have to clearly delineate the role of the AI as the partner that accelerates formation and the human as the source that provides the reason to stay.
Which leads us directly into our next discussion in this series. Once meaning becomes central to our practice and we are actively collaborating with AI to build these structures, we have to ask an important boundary question. When does variation control protect our freedom, and when does it become an artificial pressure that dominates us?
It's the fine line between an exoskeleton that helps you walk and a cage that dictates where you are allowed to step.
Perfectly said. So as we wrap up today, think about the structures you are interacting with right now. Think about the AI workflows, the templates, the daily routines you rely on. You might possess the plan, but do you own the logic? And far more importantly, why will you choose to stay with it tomorrow?
Because if there is no meaning, it will never truly be yours.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We'll see you next time.